Let's start with a big, broad question. What is socialism? How do you like to define it? How do you like to think about it?
Well, there's so many socialists out there, and we can't seem to agree about anything. So my definition, I'm sure, is really just my definition. But I think, at the minimum, socialism is about making sure that the core necessities of life, food, housing, education, and so on, are guaranteed to everyone just by virtue of being born, so that those people can reach their potential. And I think that's a minimum requirement of socialism. Beyond that, I think socialism, especially democratic socialism, the type of socialism that I believe in, is about taking democracy from just the political democratic realm and extending it into economic and social spheres as well. So if we think that democracy is a good thing, why do we allow our workplaces to be run in autocratic ways?
So, economic, political, social, in all those realms, the ideas, the philosophical ideas apply. Like what are, if you can put words to it, what are some philosophical ideas about human beings that are at the core of this?
I think at the core, it's the idea that we have intrinsic value. We are individuals that have unequal talents, of course. We're individuals that want different things, but this unique individualness can only truly come to light in a society in which there are certain collective or social guarantees. So we could think, just like Stephen Jay Gould, the scientist and socialist, used to say, about how many thousands of potential Einsteins or Leonardo da Vinci's that died, in sweatshops and on plantations and never got the chance to cultivate what was unique and human about themselves, and also never got a chance to have families and impart what was special and important to them to future generations and to posterity. My own grandmother was born in Trinidad and Tobago. She was illiterate till her dying days. She in East Orange, New Jersey. She never had the chance to write down her memories of her life in Trinidad as a young woman and what it meant. She, of course, had lots of children, and she was able to impart some stories to her children and grandchildren. But I often think about what someone with her wit and intelligence could have done with a little bit more support.
But if all human beings have intrinsic value, you don't have to be an Einstein for the application of some of the ideas that you're talking about. Is there a tension or a trade off between our human civilization, our society, helping the unlucky versus rewarding the skillful and the hardworking?
I think you could do both. There's always a balance between the two. I think you could reward people who make innovations and who improve lives for everyone through their innovations by giving them, let's say, even more consumption, even that level of inequality, while still making sure that there's not people in poverty and suffering, and while making sure that, hey, we're gonna give these people who want to work that extra 10 hours or 20 hours or want to apply their hard work, some extra benefits, but that these benefits would be not the extreme disparities that you have today.
So, at the core of socialism and maybe democratic socialism is maybe a reallocation of wealth, reallocation of resources.
I think it's wealth and resources, yes, but it's also power. And I guess one way to think about this is, some thinkers on the right, like Hayek, they would say, in their most generous moments, talking about socialists and socialism, they would say socialists want to trade some of your freedom for equality. And that's them trying to just accurately describe what socialism is trying to do. The way that I would put it is a little bit different. Socialists are proposing a trade off, but it's really a trade off between freedom and freedom. And by that, I mean, let's say you set up a successful business and you set up a business right here in Austin, Texas, some sort of firm. It's producing some widget or whatever, and it's producing a good that people really want and demand. But you have some competition. You decide to hire 20, 30 people to help you. You entered into a free contract with these people, who, under capitalism, of course, we're not living in feudalism, have the option to join any other firm, but they like you and they like this firm and they like your offer, and you're paying them, let's say, $20 an hour for 40 hours of work per week. Now, if the government comes along and says, okay, there's now a new minimum wage. The minimum wage is $22 an hour. And also there's a maximum work week, 35 hour work week. And if you work someone over 35 hours, even if they agree, you have to pay them time and a half. Now, that, of course, is now an abridgment of your freedom as an entrepreneur, your freedom to set certain terms of employment, and to engage in a contract with free people. But now your workers and other workers in the sector, because if you did it unilaterally, you just get undercut by your competition. Now, these people now have a few extra hours a week they could do whatever they want with. They could watch more NFL with it. They could, spend more time with their friends or family or whatever else. And they're still getting paid the same, if not better, because the wages also went up. So it's really a question often of trade-offs between whose freedom and autonomy are you going to prioritize? The freedom and autonomy of the entrepreneur, or the capitalist in this case, or the freedom and autonomy of ordinary workers. Now, you could create a society that swings so far in the direction of prioritizing the freedom of one group or one class or whatever else compared to another that you end up in some sort of tyranny. Now, if the state said, you, Lex, you're a capitalist, so you don't get the right to vote, or we're going to take away your private home or your ability to do things that we think are intrinsic human rights. Now, this would be tyranny. This would be an abridgment of your rights. But shaping your ability in the economic sphere to be an economic actor is, I think, within the realm and scope of democratic politics.
Yeah, so those are the extremes you're referring to. And one perspective I like to take on socialism versus capitalism is under each system, the extremes of each systems and the moderate versions of each system, how can people take advantage of it? So it seems like no matter what, part of human nature is whatever the rules, whatever the framework, whatever the system, somebody's going to take advantage of it. And that's a kind of pragmatic look at it. In practice, what actually happens. Also, the incentives and the human behavior, what actually happens in practice under these systems. So if you have a higher and higher minimum wage and people watch more and more NFL, how does that change their actual behavior as a productive member of society? And actually at the individual level, as somebody who could be an Einstein and chooses not to because NFL is so awesome to watch. So like is both,
Mhm.
how do people, malicious people that want to take advantage, maybe not malicious, but people that, like me, are lazy and want to take advantage, and people that also, I think, like me, like I tend to believe about myself that I have potential, and if I let my laziness naturally take over, which it often does, I won't materialize the potential. So if you make life too easy for me, I feel like I will never get anything done. Me personally, of course, there's a giant set of circumstances of the unlucky and the overburdened and so on. Okay, so how
Mhm.
can people take advantage of each system, socialism, capitalism?
So, for one thing, people are going to take advantage of systems. They're going to find loopholes. They're going to find ways around. They're going to find ways to at times dominate and coerce others, even in systems meant to get rid of domination and coercion. That's why we need to design our systems in such a way that it eliminates as many of these things as possible. And also, that's why we need democracy. We need freedom. So, in a Soviet system, for instance, you had the rise of this authoritarian bureaucracy that dominated and coerced others in the name of socialism. Now, that system desperately could have used some political democracy and some checks on what people were doing and some ability to reverse their power, right? And as soon as, of course, little elements of democracy was brought into that system, the system, collapsed because there started to be outlets for dissent and for dissatisfaction. So I think we can't design a priori a perfect system. We need to be committed to certain principles that allow systems to be perfected. And for me, that's the importance of democracy. So even a few years ago, not to go on a tangent, but people were lauding Chinese authoritarianism, and they're saying China is building this efficient system. The state runs so well. There's technocratic excellence. Plus, there's just productivity, and they're just working harder than Americans and whatever else. But look at in practice what really happened with COVID. Both the initial suppressing of information about what was happening in Wuhan and the outbreak, where many ordinary Chinese workers and doctors and others were trying to get the word out, and they were suppressed by Communist Party officials locally in Wuhan, probably with the collusion nationally, and now with zero COVID policies and whatever else. So I think that often we find that even though it seems like these are weak systems and democracy makes us less competent technocratically and otherwise, I think it's kind of a necessity for systems to grow and evolve, to have that freedom in civil society. But as for individuals, now, the first part of it is, yeah, I think people should be free to make their own choices. You might have tremendous potential, but you might choose to spend it in leisure. And leisure doesn't only mean doing, sitting around at home, drinking a bunch of beers, kind of wasting your life away that way. Leisure might mean spending more time with your friends and family, building these sort of relationships that are going to maybe not change the world in some meta sense, but will change the lives of the people around you and will change your community for the better.
I'm taking notes here because for me, leisure just meant playing a lot of Skyrim. This whole family relationship thing, I'm gonna have to work on that. I didn't realize that's also including leisure because I'm gonna have to reconsider my whole life here.
Hey,
anyway,
leisure should mean civic activity too, right? I mean, there's that famous book, the Robert Putnam one, Bowling Alone or whatever, which described that. For now, I mean, I was born in 1989. I like, video and computer games, so I definitely do that type of leisure too. But I found a lot more richness in my life when, in the last, decade, a lot of my leisure has returned to like going to the local bar for like the couple drinks I have a week instead of doing it at home alone watching TV or something, because you get that random conversation, that sense of a place and belonging. But I guess what's the undercurrent maybe of your question was, now if you have a system with lots of carrots but not the whip of, hey, you might be destitute, you might be unemployed, you might not be able to support yourself unless you're working a certain amount, would we still be as productive? Would we still be able to generate enough value for society? And I think that that's a question that is quite interesting. I think that we're living in a society now with enough abundance that we could afford more people deciding to opt out of the system, out of production, and that the carrots of staying in, more money for consumption, more ability to do cool things, more just social rewards that comes from being successful or from providing would be enough. But that's another thing that would have to be balanced in a system. So if we're seeing mass unemployment by choice in a democratic socialist system, then you might need to reconfigure the incentives. You might need to encourage people to go back into production. But that's something that, again, you could do through democracy and through good governance. You don't have to set the perfect blueprint in motion. Write up a treatise now, and 50 years from now, try to follow it like it's scripture.
So, by the way, I do like how you said whip instead of stick in carrot and stick. That's putting a weight on the scale of which is better. But yes, but I would actually argue to push back that the wealthier we get as a society, as a world, that the more comfortable the social nets become. So the less of a whip or a stick they become. Because one of the negative consequences, even if you're on welfare, is like, well, life is not going to be that great. But the wealthier we become, the better the social programs become, the easier life becomes at the bottom. And so you might not have this motivation financially to get out from the bottom. That said, the pushback is that there's something about human nature in general, money aside, that strives for greatness, that strives to provide um, a great life, a great middle class life for your family. And so that's the motivator to get off from the bottom.
Well, I think a lot of people who are stuck at the bottom of the labor market today, um, one, these are people who are kind of are true philanthropists, because a lot of them are the ones who are working two jobs and are working 60 plus hours and are providing. In this country, it's such a bargain for their labor because they're so underpaid. So many of the things that the rest of us use to enjoy life and consumption or whatever else, like I got here from downtown Austin, and I think my Lyft, I did tip, but I think my Lyft was like $8 base or whatever else. It's the I think that we are all indebted to people who are working, and we don't see it at various stages of the production process, from the workers in China and Taiwan producing technological things that we're recording this on, to growers and workers in agriculture in the US. So I think that one, working class people are already working, but as far as getting out from under poverty and desperation, we're in a society that doesn't give people a lot of tools. So if you don't have access to good public schools from age 5 until 12, 13, it's going to be really hard to move from generations of your family being involved in manual labor to doing other forms of labor. You're going to be stuck at a certain part of our labor market as a result. If you don't have access to decent healthcare, throughout your life, you might be already preordained to an early grave by the time that something kicks in. You really want to change something in your life in your mid-20s. Obviously, it's a combination of agency and all these other factors. There's still something, I think, innately human, innately striving that a lot of people have, but we don't really give people in our current society the tools to really be full participants in our society. We just take for granted, for example, I'm from the Northeast, so I give like excessively Northeast examples. But we take for granted that someone from Hartford, Connecticut is going to have, your average working class person in Hartford is going to have a very different life outcome than someone born on the same day, the same hour, in Greenwich, Connecticut. We take for granted that accidents of birth are going to dictate outcomes.
So you mean like, depending on the conditions of where you grew up, there's going to be a fundamentally different experience in terms of education, in terms of the resources available to you to allow yourself to flourish.
Yes,
If you do
a
the
poor
work.
city and a rich city, and Connecticut is great. It's highly underrated. Both New Yorkers and people from Boston kind of have a colonial feeling about Connecticut, where
Yeah.
we make fun of it and we try to carve it up. The West belongs to New York, the East to Boston, but I'm here for Connecticut nationalism. I think it's a great place.